I am Tushar Kelkar, my code is TKB and I am from Rao IIT Academy. Now we are going to discuss today biological classification. Now what is this actually classification? That we have studied already this in earlier chapter. That classification is nothing but fixing a position of an organism in a given set of plan. And much obvious, if at all we want to fix a position of any organism in a given set of plan, we need to have that plan, and that plan is nothing but the given set of classification. So that is what is actually called as biological classification. Now who did it for first time? That there are several scientists, right from Theophrastus and Aristotle and say Pliny and all, many of them are there. Whereas now in this discussion we are going to talk about Linnaeus classification first. Now what does Linnaeus, that we know it, this Linnaeus very well, that Linnaeus is a father of taxonomy, whereas this Linnaeus suggested a two-kingdom classification. He suggested two-kingdom classification, that according to Linnaeus, what is the case? That is, all living organisms can be grouped under or can be categorized under two kingdoms. Which are the two kingdoms? That's the very first kingdom as a Plantae, and then the second as Animalia. That is, all plants will be going in the kingdom Plantae, whereas the second, all the animals, they will be going in the Animalia. Now what are the major characters suggested by Linnaeus so as to do this classification, two kingdom classification? There's a very first, that is whether that organism is sedentary or motile. So as according to him, all sedentary organisms, those who won't be in a position to move, will be going in Plantae, whereas the motile organisms, they will be going in Animalia. That's the first category. Whereas the second category does depend on their mode of nutrition, that is this Plantae group members, they are going to make their own food material, they are autotrophs, whereas Animalia, they are heterotrophs. Whereas the third very important thing which he considered, that is very important character about the cell. That's all cells having cell wall considered to be a plant kingdom cell, and all the organisms which are showing cell wall in the component of cell were placed in a Plantae, whereas the animal cells are naked, that don't have cell wall but having directly a plasma membrane. So these are the three major principles used by Linnaeus to divide this entire living organisms present on this planet into two kingdom, Plantae and Animalia. But much obvious, after discovery of microscope or after use of microscope, several such organisms, they started coming in picture, which cannot be kept either in a kingdom Plantae or in a Animalia. What are the examples for it? That is nothing but a very important one organism called as Euglena, which is a unicellular organism. Now it is going to show both the kingdom characters. Which are that both the kingdom characters? That is, Euglena is an autotroph. It is going to have chloroplast, and with the help of chloroplast they are going to prepare their own food material, so as Euglena can be kept in a Plantae kingdom because of this. Whereas surprisingly, this Euglena, when light is not present, it will absorb the food material as typically like an animal. Whereas it is showing autotrophic mode of nutrition but doesn't have cell wall. So as there is oftenly the confusion between a botanist and zoologist so as to keep them in a, say, kingdom Plantae or kingdom Animalia. Whereas likewise the slime molds are the typical example, which are going to show vegetative organ or vegetative structures as typically a jelly-like substance, and which can be in a position to move here and there, so as keeps on absorbing food material and digesting it. But at the time of, which is a typical character of Animalia, whereas at the time of reproduction, these slime molds are going to behave exactly like a kingdom Plantae members. Why? Because they are going to become dry and they are going to produce various reproductive structures, especially sexual structures, and definitely they will be of typically plant in origin. So as oftenly because of this discovery of these particular organisms and all, this two kingdom classification was having many demerits. So which are that two demerits of two kingdom classification? That's the very first. That's as the invention of microscope and all we started coming across, that is the cells or the organisms can be either prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Now these prokaryotic organisms we have studied already, that doesn't have a distinct nucleus and doesn't have membrane bounded cell organelles, whereas eukaryotic organisms, they are going to have a cell which is going to have a typical nucleus and membrane bounded cell organelle. So as now in this two kingdom classification, in Plantae and in Animalia, many examples are there which are kept prokaryotes and eukaryotes in a single kingdom. So as that is not acceptable, whereas the second very important, that is the motile non-motile organisms are placed in two different groups, whereas different ways of many confusing organisms which cannot be placed either in a kingdom Plantae or kingdom Animalia. So these are the demerits of two kingdom classification which was given by Linnaeus. Now because of that, oftenly scientists they started occurring with mistakes, that is which organism is to be placed in which kingdom. So as there was another scientist whose name was Haeckel. Now this Haeckel, what he suggested from two kingdom classification, he suggested three kingdom classification. Now what he suggested, along with the kingdom Plantae and kingdom Animalia, there should be a third kingdom which is to be called as Protista. And he suggested that all unicellular organisms are to be kept in this Protista group. Why? Because in a two kingdom classification it was happening, that is kingdom Plantae was having unicellular as well as multicellular organisms, whereas Animalia also were having unicellular and multicellular organisms, and one cannot imagine unicellular which are much more simple structures and the multicellular which is showing much more complexity in a one group. So as that problem was solved of two kingdom classification demerit, that is all protists like blue-green algae, bacteria, then the slime molds, they were removed from either from Plantae or from Animalia, and they have been formed in a separate kingdom by Haeckel. It was called as kingdom Protista. But still oftenly there are segregation was not taking place of prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So after this three kingdom classification which was suggested by Haeckel, there was another scientist whose name was Copeland. Now what this Copeland suggested, that instead of now all the biological organisms coming under three groups, three kingdom, there should be a fourth kingdom, and much obvious that system was called as four kingdom classification. Now this Copeland suggested there's a fourth kingdom along with the three earlierly placed kingdom, like kingdom Protista, kingdom Plantae and kingdom Animalia. Along with that, a fourth kingdom was suggested, and it was suggested as Monera by Copeland. Now according to Copeland, now which was another very important step, according to Copeland, or what Copeland suggested, that is now instead of keeping all unicellular organisms in a Protista, what he suggested, that is in the Protista remaining organism should be like that, whereas there should be a separate kingdom which was called as Monera by him, and in this Monera all prokaryotes should be there. So as all prokaryotes will be coming in Monera, for example bacteria and a cyanobacteria and slime molds, they will be coming in the Monera, whereas in Protista all remaining organisms will be there, like Chlamydomonas, which are eukaryotes, and a majorly protozoans and a unicellular animal and plant kingdom members, whereas Plantae, which will be having autotrophic organisms, and Animalia, which was having heterotrophic mode of organisms. So as according to Copeland, there should be now four kingdom classification. But still some of the organisms were having some dicey kind of position, and the questions were raised that is about the fungi. Now this fungi is altogether a very new or very exclusive type of group, whereas it is showing majority of the characters to that of resembling to that of Plantae kingdom, but some of the characters which are very unique characters of Plantae kingdom are not there in this fungi. So as oftenly there was a say what we can say dispute so as to keep this fungi member either in a Plantae kingdom or in Animalia kingdom. So as lastly, most recently, it was suggested by Whittaker, another group itself, or in another, say that group from the Plantae kingdom was removed and it was placed as a kingdom level, and then finally the classification becomes a 5-kingdom classification. Whereas it was suggested by Whittaker.
झी 24 तास रहा एक पाऊल पुढे.